There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. Maya Angelou.
For over 20 years now, I have had the pleasure of working as a personal trainer. In that time, I have experienced a vast spectrum of human nature in all its imperfections. I have learned, taught, laughed, cried, been angered, and felt sorrow. The one feeling I do not have is regret, for each interaction is a story unto itself, and like any good story, they should be told. I met Frank on a Wednesday, and what stood out to me right off the bat was his obvious work ethic. Frank was very dedicated. In an industry and a business that's rather unique, Frank's company stands out as a giant, very representative of the man that I was speaking to that day. He'd been referred to me by another client and was new to the whole idea of personal training because Frank felt that since he already maintained a rather consistent workout regimen, which he designed himself, that he'd completed on a daily basis, really wasn't sure whether or not he needed this professional help. The concept of a personal trainer was somewhat of an anomaly to him, and I understood that. I'd seen it before, especially with this particular client and these particular age groups. I did my usual and asked a few questions and then listened to Frank's story as he told me what he had completed prior to an accident that he had in his office. Frank had suffered a fall on some steps that he used on a regular basis and hit his head and caused some damage in not only his shoulder but also his hip. This had obviously set him back, as it would anybody, and had made him feel vulnerable, possibly for the first time in his life. As I listened to his story, I could hear that he was very proud of the exercise regimen that he had maintained for so long, and in the interview was questioning again, do I really need to get somebody to help me with this? A very open and honest man, Frank, though skeptical, was willing to listen to what I had to say and really was fully involved in investigating this particular choice. As I listened to his story and took notes, I started working on my usual explanation of why somebody at a certain age, or at any age for that matter, should work with a personal trainer. What benefits he would get out of it, things that I could improve, and also some questions that I had for him about fitness in general that I knew he would probably be a bit surprising to him. That is a conversation I've had on many occasions for the past 31 years, and one that I feel that I could do almost in my sleep. But what was so impressive to me, again, was Frank had crossed off a lot of the concerns that I typically have with someone in this age demographic. See, Frank was no spring chicken. Frank was starting with me at 88 years old. Unlike many of my 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, even 40-year-olds, Frank didn't start the conversation off with his age. That was the first red flag. Well, in a good way. Because you see, Frank had not only checked off the box of age doesn't matter, but he also had several things that he was doing already that proved my point over and over again about how we degenerate our minds and we degenerate our bodies, and we blame it on time. Frank was continuing to go to work. Now, I don't think that if somebody retires, they're automatically going to deteriorate. Quite the opposite. If you plan, as I've spoken about in previous podcasts, if you plan to succeed, you plan to go on, you plan to be somebody else, you plan to have a purpose, then you typically will not deteriorate. Well, Frank's work is his purpose. Not just the work that he does, but the people that he helps in his work. And so he maintains a schedule, going to work every day and getting off at 5 o'clock, even on Fridays. Frank was married for several years. He lost his wife some years ago, but he's now has another lady friend. He has a girlfriend. Not only that, Frank is working on a new house. Frank was seeing me today not to just patch, as so many of my older clients typically look at exercise. Frank was there like one of my athletes who had been sidelined because of an ACL injury or some other kind of injury and was ready to get back into the game, get back to 100%, get back to being the person he was before. Or, like most every athlete, how about we get better? Better than we were before. Not just better from the accident, better from the injury, but better than we were before. To some, Frank's outlook would be astounding, would be amazing, would be fascinating even. Well, to me, Frank's outlook should be the norm. Because Frank was not giving up. Frank was continuing on. Though we had quite a few limitations, Frank and I, that day, set out with some massive goals. Let's look at the limitations first. He'd had a fall. He'd hit his head. It affected his vision, hurt his shoulder, hurt his hip, as I stated earlier. And so we had some physical things to conquer. He'd been walking with a walker. He was now walking with a cane. And because of the time that he had spent in the injury and using those apparatus, he had actually developed a slight stoop. All of this at any age can be reversed. Most people don't realize that. Frank certainly did. It's one of the first things he mentioned to me. I've got to get rid of this stoop. I thought that was tremendous. It was great. He knew that was temporary. He had not accepted it as a foregone conclusion that he was always going to have this early onset of a Dowager's hump for absolutely no reason, actually a manufactured Dowager's hump. He knew he was going to get rid of that. And then he proceeded to tell me how many push-ups he was doing prior to the fall, which was quite impressive, and how he wanted to get back to doing those again. But not only that, I asked him, okay, once we get you back to where you were, then where do you want to go? And looked me in the eye without a laugh and without a sarcastic tone. And he said, I want to do a one-handed push-up. I said, okay. We wrote that down. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't sarcastic. There was no laughing that went on afterwards. He was serious. Just like any other athlete, Frank wanted to move forward. That wasn't Frank's only goal. Frank also, as I meandered around his office and went upstairs where he actually does his workout, I found a pull-up bar with a Roman chair and also push-up bars on the bottom of it. And I asked him if he'd ever used it. He said, no, the machine I use is in this other room, where he quickly walked me into this side area, well lit, overlooking the pool, that has a multi-piece, chest press, lat pull down, leg extension. And he told me the high number and high repetitions that he does on those particular machines, and he was doing them every single day. Well, I looked back at that body weight piece and I said, well, have you ever done a pull-up? He said, no, I don't believe I have. And if I have, it's been years. And I said, can we write that down? He said, absolutely. Again, no sarcasm, no laughing. This is a planned goal. We're going to reach this height. Sometime later, after we'd started working out, I asked him, what are you doing this for? I have found that, as I've stated many times, our mission statement is to make people feel better about being themselves. Everybody comes to us for a mental problem, and they usually are attacking it in a physical way. So I asked Frank, since we'd gotten to that level of conversation, I asked him, I said, well, what are you doing this for? And he said, well, I want to get back to sailing. It's a beautiful sailboat, and there's a competitive sailor, and the way he got into it was quite interesting. He rented a small sailboat one day, knowing nothing about sailing, and headed out into Mobile Bay, where he proceeded to turn the boat over, not once, but 3 different times. As he sat waiting to try to figure out how to right this boat, a boat came over and asked him if they could bring Frank in. Now, Frank started this, past 50 years old. Frank's response to the gentleman, the captain of the other boat, was, no, I want you to help me right this boat. I'm going to sail it in. He showed him how to right it, had to go get his centerboard for him, and once he learned how to right it, he started sailing it back in, again, tumping it 2 more times, but then he righted the sailboat both those times himself and made it back to port. Most people would have given up. Instead, quite the opposite. Not just because it was a challenge, but because he thoroughly enjoyed what he had done, Frank became a sailor. And this is a goal, to get Frank back to sailing. Another goal, of course, is to get back to driving. Now, part of that is limited because of his vision due to the fall, but his physician says that's coming back. And so the physical ability will be accompanied by, of course, his vision as far as getting back to driving. But we wrote it down anyway. It was another goal. Frank and I started working out that following Monday. We typically don't like to start clients on Friday just so we can do a follow-up with them and have them come in the facility if we need to stretch them out or mitigate any soreness they may have. So we started on Monday. I arrived at his office. We would go upstairs and we would do a typical evaluation workout. I wanted to see where we were physically starting, and I found something that I see quite often in many of my clients, especially my senior clients. Though Frank had some tremendous arm strength, we found that out through some band work where I kept having to increase the level of the bands that we were using to stronger and stronger and stronger bands. I also found that Frank had difficulty getting out of his chair. We were in a regular, normal office chair with that kind of height, and he was having to use his hands and push very hard to stand up, and I told him that won't do. We've got to surpass that. Now, I will say for the first couple of weeks, Frank was a bit frustrated, and I asked him, what he was concerned about, because I told him this is going to get better. I explained to him the physiology. I explained to him about the different things that I needed him to do as far as his water intake, his nutrition, and also his exercise. But then I found out that he was continuing to do his daily exercise regimens every morning. Now, I'm the last person usually to tell anybody to stop exercising, but this is something I see quite often in the greatest generation, and that is they have an incredible work ethic, and if they fall behind in something, their answer to it is work harder. So I have a lot of clients in that generation. I'm very thankful of that. But their answer to anything is, like I say, work harder. And one of the biggest challenges I have is to get them to take time off in order to rest, to repair. This took another week and a half of convincing Frank that I needed him to work with me and do some of these exercises, most of these exercises, on alternate days. I finally broke through when he started increasing his push-ups. Now, he was doing up to 20 push-ups a day before the fall. After the fall, he couldn't do one. He got up to 3, and that's where he started listening to me about changing his regimen. It was very difficult for him, and I understood. Well, within a month and a half, we were at 8. And more importantly, we're now on the beginning of our second month. And he is not only standing up out of his chair without using his hands, he was standing up from an 18-inch bench. And for this past week, we've done 3 sets of 10 repetitions standing up from a 12-inch block. And I mean a full sit with the knee higher than the hip and standing up. His outlook has not changed. He plans to hit all his goals, and I'm quite certain he will. And the main reason I say that is not only is he giving me the work ethic, not only is he working with a trainer, not only is he following the physical requirements that I have him doing, Frank is checking all the boxes. As I've stated many times, the reason we deteriorate has nothing to do with the time on the calendar. It has to do with 4 different characteristics, which are 100% controllable. Activity, nutrition, lifestyle, and the most important, which I think you know by now, Frank obviously has, and that is mindset. He takes in protein every single day at every single meal. He's upping his water intake from 80 ounces to over 100 ounces. He's thinking clearer. He's thinking sharper. He's walking better. He's checking every box. But it begins with the fact that Frank has the right mindset. We're only 2 months into this, and who knows? Those that believe that time passing on a calendar actually causes you to deteriorate, well, maybe you'll find out that you're right. Maybe we'll find out what I've learned for the last 31 years, and that is that there's more science, there's more proof that time passing on a calendar does not cause deterioration. I'll tell you what, I'll keep you up with Frank's story, but my money is on Frank.